We got asked a question on one of our videos, and funny enough, it was asked, I suppose, in part because of an article I wrote like forever ago. And when I wrote that article, for those of you who don't know, the original Proteus website, I had a class in, I think it was either my bachelor's or my master's, and I had to like do like a small business kind of thing. And so I did some like Proteus stuff before Proteus was even like really a thing. And that was one of the only articles I ever wrote for debate, and it was about how practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect, and it talked a lot about practice and concepts surrounding practice. But bottom line, we got asked a question on our most recent video, and this is what it said. TLDR, I'm trying to internalize how to approach on a mindfulness level. Patient, perfect practice makes perfect. How do I know when to call it for a day, know that my returns are diminishing, or that I might even hurt my skill development by trying to rush something? I'm obviously developing my own sense for this, but it would be helpful for you all to give your experiences on keeping practice healthy yet refined. I completely agree. It would absolutely be helpful if we did that. So here I am making that video just for you and the 7 other people who watch this channel occasionally. Okay. The first thing I want to say is a concept that I think I've explained. It might even be in our like how to get better at debate video, but if it's not, it's definitely a concept I've talked about in Proteus, maybe even in an article because I haven't read it in a long time. But I discussed this concept of the MED, which is the minimum effective dose. And the idea of the minimum effective dose is that when it comes to like pharmaceuticals and medicine, there's a minimum amount that we give people and we get, roughly speaking, the desired effects. And the idea is that if you go less than that, you don't get really anything from it. And if you go more than that, it can actually potentially become toxic, right? You could overdose on the thing. And I applied this model to practice, right? And the idea becomes that, in my view, in most cases, for most debate work, and when I say debate work, I suppose I really mean skill work rather than like writing files. So this is mostly about like drills, which is what this person was asking about. I think you actually want to do as little as possible. And let me rephrase that to not say as little as possible, but rather as little as is necessary, right? And it's totally understandable that you're struggling with figuring out when do you know you've done that. And in any case where it was possible, my advice would obviously be, well, talk to a coach, right? Talk to a better debater, kind of ask them to sort of lead you through being a debater. I'm really big on mentorship and whatnot. Obviously, I literally am a coach to this day. I love helping people with debate stuff. But I totally understand that that's not a resource everyone has access to. So the question becomes, how do you know when you've done enough, when you've done too much? How do you keep it healthy and whatnot? And I have a lot of thoughts on that question, and I'm sort of just going to walk through them, but wish this was more concise. Wish I had put more thought into it before I sat down and started recording, but my wife's going to be home soon with food, so I wanted to make sure I got this out for you. First thing I would say, it's all about having a routine. And what I mean by that is if you look into, and I use guitar a lot for examples because I'm a guitar player, but if you look into a lot of professional guitar players, they all have a routine that they do, usually daily. Maybe it's before a show, end of day, beginning of day, whatever it is. And generally speaking, these routines are no more than like 20 to 30 minutes, right? It's kind of just the basic work to make sure they've kind of touched their elements. And I really do find that for no specific reason, that 30 minutes to me is the upper bound on most debate skill practicing that you want to do, with one notable exception. And I would say that notable exception is when you're doing the compression and insertion drill, right? Which is the drill where you give the same speech multiple times, but with the first time you do it, it's really long. You give yourself, 15, 20 minutes to do it. Then 13, 12, 10, 11, so on and so forth. That drill just takes forever, so you don't need more time. But for everything else, I would say you have a 30-minute cutoff. Why 30 minutes? Let me give you a few reasons, because I know there's a few of you who are like, oh, I'd love to practice debate 20 hours a day if I could. I was kind of that kid. I've had students like that. I'm just going to shout one out. Alan Fishman. That kid worked his ass off and could go just as hard as me, and I always appreciated that about him. With that said, 30 minutes is a really ideal time, in part because I think just about anyone can find 30 minutes in a day. And if you can't find 30 minutes a day, then you probably need way more than 30 minutes to just relax, because it sounds like your life's very stressed. But I also think 30 minutes is sort of enough that you guarantee you do something, right? If you say 5 minutes a day, then like, I don't know how seriously you're going to take that 5 minutes. I will also note that the benefit of 30 minutes being a relatively short period of time, but still enough time that you could work through a routine and have several drills, is there's this, I forget whose law it is, but it's someone's law, like one of those law things, that says a task will take as long as you allocate for it, right? So when I tell my students in college, your paper's due on Saturday, a lot of them come to me and say, oh, this thing came up on Friday, so I couldn't get it done. And it's like, well, what do you mean? I assigned it to you last week. I didn't assign it to you Friday. You've had an entire week to do it. But they've decided, based on this law or whatever, their personal lives, that they're going to do it at effectively the last minute, right? And that's what causes issues for them. When you set a short period of time, it forces you to make sure you actually get stuff in that amount of time. If you have an indeterminate amount of time, then you can kind of lollygag and not focus. But I used to try this when I was really into trying to get better at League of Legends and didn't have as much free time. I would just play one game a day. I was like, I'm only allowed to play one game a day, which means I have to try as hard as I can in that game and really figure out ahead of time what it is I want to work on and practice, because I'm not going to get multiple attempts at it. I have to be completely focused on that one specific moment. And obviously, I think for debate, that makes a lot of sense, because like it's very much round to round. And once you get into eliminations, unless the tournament has double elim, like you get one shot. You don't get a bunch of chances to do it over and over again. Ignoring the 30-minute rule, ignoring that you should probably just do about 30 minutes of work and that's going to do you and that's going to get you kind of where you want to be. My next thought is, if you record yourself, I think it is a lot easier to know when to stop. I mean this in two ways. One is like audio recordings, video recordings, but the other one is sort of like spreadsheet monitoring. I think I've mentioned before that when I was practicing spreading, so again, story time, I graduated college in the fall instead of in the spring, but I was still allowed to compete for the spring. And so I went and moved back to my hometown, like an hour away from where my university was, which means that I didn't have like day-to-day contact with my teammates or my coaches. I would only come out once a week for practice. And so obviously it was on me to find time to have like a regimen and kind of do my 30 minutes a day. Because of that, I had to make sure that it wasn't too much, too little, and it had to be the kind of work that I could evaluate independently, because I didn't expect my coach to, like, back then Zoom wasn't a thing, really. Oh, I got maybe, whatever, you know what I mean. Zoom wasn't as popular, and Steve wasn't going to watch me online or whatever. So I made a spreadsheet, and when I would spread, I would say, okay, here's what I practiced today. Here's, like, the file. Here's how many words it was, and here's how fast I did it, and that would give me my words per minute. And if I had just done that, I don't think that would have been super effective, because like I would have just been trying to push that number up over and over again. But I also recorded every single one of those. I recorded every spreading drill I did, which is so funny because I found these old files from like 2016, 2017 that I shared with some of my students this year of just me in the summer or whenever practicing spreading. But the reason you need the recordings is because that's what keeps you honest. A lot of people hate listening to recordings of themselves, and because like you're so critical of yourself in recordings, and I think that makes it excellent for debate work, because you notice like, okay, when have I gotten to a point where I'm going so fast that I have lost clarity and it's no longer like redeemable? I had a student this year, Brenna and Tristan, and Brenna got really fast. Like she came into this year really fast, and she could still go kind of as fast as she wants to, but like doesn't necessarily do that many like spreading drills or whatever these days. But there was just a point where Brenna was sending me recordings where I'm like, hey dude, super fast. I have no idea what you're saying because we're lacking clarity, right? And so, so many practices and just sessions I've had with Brenna, it's just her going fast and then me being like, this is where I lost you. Like at this level of speed, I lost the clarity. So we want to try and maintain under this level, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so recording yourself is a huge part of that. A third piece of information, right? We've already talked about kind of the 30-minute rule. We've already talked about recording yourself so that you can kind of tell when the diminishing returns happen. The next thing I would say is, if it hurts, stop. I think this is really, really important, right? If you're practicing flowing and you're having wrist pain, stop. If you are spreading a lot and you're starting to have jaw pain, or your tongue's getting sore, or your throat's getting sore, stop. It's definitely not worth pushing through those kinds of things. It's not like, weightlifting where like, oh, the last reps are where you really get the strength from, or the muscle from, or whatever it is, right? Coming back to this concept of routine, I think that as far as the skill work stuff goes, if you have like a good balanced routine, right, you've got like speed drill, clarity drill, kind of sight reading type drill, maybe a refutation drill, like a response drill, or like a kind of off the dome coming up with arguments type drill, impact turns, link turns, whatever it is you want to do. I think if you just have at least those sort of 4 components, 5 components, whatever you want to categorize them as, I think that'll do you, right? I think if you just do that work and give each one kind of 5, 6, 7, however many minutes you have for it to get up to 30, that you can feel pretty confident that you will keep making progress as long as you are tracking progress, right? Because if you don't track it, then you have no way of knowing whether you're getting better or not. And people are really bad at kind of identifying without sort of objective metrics or like empirical evidence that they are improving. It's really easy to feel like you're stuck in place. That transitions towards the second half of this video. There is a guitar teacher. His name's Tomo Fujita. He was John Mayer's guitar teacher. He's a professor at the Berklee College of Music. And he has like this whole slogan, and he's basically like, don't judge yourself, don't compare yourself to others, and don't expect progress too fast. I think it's like one other element, but I think it's be kind to yourself. But don't expect progress too fast. I think that part is so important, right? If you're doing the work, like if you're just really doing the work and you keep doing it consistently, you're finding that 30 minutes a day. 30 minutes a day is like 3.5 hours. A week is like 150 hours a year, or whatever it ends up being. Not great at math. That's more than enough to get to a high level, I would say, in terms of the skill type stuff. Now, obviously, you also have to add in all the rounds you're going to do, whether that's practice rounds, live rounds, whatever it might be, or the work you do with your actual team, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I think you just got to find 30 minutes a day. You got to get a solid routine. You just do that and stick with it. And the good thing is, if after 2 weeks, let's say, give yourself 2 weeks of doing your routine, if you look at your metrics, you look at your spreadsheet, you look at your recordings, and you're not seeing a difference, then that probably tells you either something's wrong with the routine, or you're not pushing yourself enough when it comes to the routine, or maybe you do need more time, you need less time, you need to focus on specific element XYZ. Okay, second part is, that's all skill work stuff, right? Like speaking, delivery type stuff. I think that's fundamentally different than like argument writing and argument research, like argument selection type stuff, because that can just kind of take as long as it takes. There's been tons of time where I've like just sat in a chair for, 6 to 12 hours, just going down a debate rabbit hole. And I find with that stuff that there is very rarely diminishing returns as long as you kind of know what it is you're doing, because obviously if you're just looking at garbage sources, and if you don't know how to cut cards, you don't know how to like skim articles, read abstracts, etc., that can be a problem. But with that stuff, there's very little damage associated with it, because you're not going to like overwork your hand or your voice or whatever. You're just like reading, and reading is going to make you smarter. So that's I guess a different component. I think you're mostly asking about the still stuff, and mostly just asking about like, how can I figure out when to stop? Summarizing all that, I think develop a routine that takes roughly 30 minutes, track your progress, not your practice, for like 2 weeks in a spreadsheet and in recordings and things of that nature. And based on that, you should probably get to a pretty good place, because you'll have at least some data about whether you are improving, whether you're not improving, etc. The very last thing I'll say is that there's definitely a ceiling on certain stuff, right? I don't think I could have gotten much faster than what my fastest was my senior year. Like, I kind of just hit a wall where like it did not feel like it was hard for me just to hit that speed sometimes even. And certainly felt like pushing past it would not have necessarily been productive. And I really want to make this clear to you, right? When it comes to speed, because that's what a lot of kids end up focusing on, not saying that's you. When it comes to speed, a lot of kids like go down. I knew a kid who used to tell me, used to brag, like, yeah, dude, I do speaking drills like 4 hours a day. And I'm just like, well, that's why you're not that good at debate. Because speaking is such a small part of the activity. And there's kind of just like a level you have to get to be at the highest level, or to be able to compete at the highest level. And then beyond that, like, you're not getting a ton of value out of it unless you're going against like literally the fastest people in the country. And I just think it's so hard, right? Kind of the idea of like diminishing returns, where once you hit the like 90th percentile on speed, I think you're fine, and you don't need to put in another 100 hours to get to 95th or 99th percentile. I don't think there's great value there. I think there's better things to spend your time on. So that's what I got. I hope that answers your question. Again, if you had a coach, if you have someone to talk to, if you want someone to check in with, sounds like you have your own team. So good on you. And if not, thank you so much for reaching out. Thank you for enjoying the content, and have a great one.